Okay, Rosemary, thank you. President Trump seems to be backing off his apparent support for stronger background checks for gun sales. This according to a report by the Washington Post. Right after mass shootings early this month in Gilroy, El Paso, and Dayton, the president said there was a great appetite for tightening background checks. But in recent days, the president has focused more on keeping guns away from the mentally ill. And the Washington Post reports negotiations among lawmakers for a bipartisan gun control bill have gone nowhere. For more on all this, we're joined in studio here by Joe Tuman, political analyst and professor at San Francisco State University. Joe, always good of you to come in.
Pleasure. Thanks.
Why do you think we are seeing the president shift his stance on the issue of gun control and in particular stronger background checks?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things in play. The first of them is that there's an election that's looming not too far off, and the president is mindful about that. So the initial embrace of this, which is something he's done on other occasions as well, including, if you remember, with the Las Vegas shooting.
Sure.
You know, we had someone who allegedly, ISIS said he was their person, but he wasn't. That was probably a person who was suffering from mental illness. But Trump said even back then, yeah, we need to do something more.
Although we had the bump stock ban.
Well, we got a bump stock ban and nothing else is the thing. Why wasn't anybody paying attention to the fact that this guy was loading all those guns into a hotel room? Was a good question.
Do you think the president was ever serious or is still serious? Let me put it that way. Is he still serious about tightening background checks for gun sales in this country?
It's a good question. Before he was president, when he was just Donald Trump, man about town in New York, he was a kind of a liberal in many respects and actually had a position that was different on gun control than the one that he has right now. The real answer to your question, tying this back to the election, is that there's been enough time now since El Paso, since what happened in Ohio, what happened in Gilroy, for the NRA to have talked to the president about what kind of support he's not going to get in the re-election effort if he goes along with background checks. There's very little appetite for that in the Senate. I doubt that Mitch McConnell would let anything get to the floor unless the president was behind it. And even then, I'm not sure that he would allow that necessarily to happen. So these are, I think, the reasons that he's changed. But now here's the other thing that I want to make sure we talk about.
Well, when you talk about Mitch McConnell, though, let me ask you about that, because there's been a lot of sort of finger pointing back and forth. The president says, well, look, Congress needs to take action. And Congress says, well, you know, the president's got the bully pulpit. He needs to push things forward if he really wants tougher background checks and he wants a gun control bill. But where does the truth lie? It's somewhere in the middle.
Well, here's the reality. The reality for Donald Trump is that if he doesn't grow his base of voters, which is somewhere in the high 30s or low 40s, he will lose his re-election bid. There's no question about that. And the only way he can do that at this point, because he's very much beloved by Republicans at this point, or a lot of Republicans, is to grab independent voters or to get Democrats to vote for him. The polling right now on gun control and background checks overwhelmingly with the public. I mean, we were looking at numbers in the high 80s and low 90 percentile, low 90th percentile.
And the polling also shows
they endorse it.
And the polling also shows many Republicans, an overwhelming majority of Republicans, support
the same thing.
Universal background checks. So why do you think the president believes that it's a risky strategy to push forward on gun control?
I think that he believes the other polls about his own personal approval with Republicans that show that people in the 90th percentile in the Republican Party think he's doing a good job overall. And so I think he's betting on that. But, Alex, the point that I'm trying to make in this is if he's going to win re-election, he's got to get more than 50% of the vote. And he's not going to do that if he doesn't endorse something that most people in this country, the vast overwhelming majority of people in this country, think is a necessary change, which is not just background checks, but a whole range of things that we have to do, which are just common sense measures to make sure that people don't do what we've seen this summer.
Do we ever see gun control legislation this go around, do you think?
Well, I think it's about as close as we're going to get at this point, and it may be that we won't get meaningful gun control, but what we'll get is a change in the election.
Okay.
And then we'll see if the Democratic candidates who've been on the other side of this issue control the Senate perhaps next time around and will push something through or not.
And that will change the dynamics of all of it. All right, we appreciate your insight. Joe Tuman, political analyst and professor at San Francisco State.
Nice to see you.
Thanks as always. Good to see you too.
Sure.